uh, when one of the good things the Portuguese and the Spanish did in Latin America and in Africa was that they actually, with the Catholic Church, there was a registration of births. But the problem through the years, it has been disappearing. And nowadays, there is a lot of countries that has just give up registering people, especially in Africa. So there is a whole bunch of people that they don't even know where they are and if they exist. So with the crisis of 2015, the Commission began realizing that there were a lot of people moving in the European Union that didn't have really papers. So they decided to create, the platform was created by the Council conclusion of 3 and 4 December 2015, and it says as two main goals: invite the Commission to launch exchanges of good practices among member states using the European Migration Network as a platform, and invite member states' national contact points to actively participate in that platform, providing all relevant information with a view of ensuring that it will be a useful instrument in order to achieve the objectives of reducing the number of stateless people, strengthening their protection, and reducing the risk of discrimination. The platform is coordinated by EM and Luxembourg because it was during the Luxembourgish presidency, so this was more or less the gift we got. So our activities, we produce policy briefs. We have an EM and Inform on the state of play of the stateless in the EU, now with Norway and Georgia, exchange information and best practices between member states, international organizations, and civil society, organize activities in collaboration with international organizations, relevant EU agencies, and NGOs in order to raise awareness on statelessness and the means to reduce it. So now, let's get to see what is the difference with international protection. As you can see, the international protection, the legal framework is well established. 1951, you have the Convention relating to the status of refugees, and in 1967, we have the protocol relating to the status of refugees. And the European Union, as you can see, have put 3 directives in the Directive 2011/95 of EU, then the Directive 2013/32 and the Directive 2013/33. In this one, the first one is the Qualification Directive. The second one is the common procedures for granting and withdrawing the international protection. And the last one is the standards for reception of the applicants. So in the reception conditions, you get that the international protection applicant will receive information on how the procedure is going to go. They will get a documentation, so they can go and apply for material conditions. They have residence and free movement until the case is defined. They have the right for family unity. That means that families cannot be separated. Detention is very limited. Schooling and education of minors, well, this is not a problem because even in Portugal, you can be a stateless or a refugee, you will go to school because of compulsory education. Employment, well, this has its limits: vocational training, material conditions, housing, board, pocket money, and access to health. In the Determination Procedure Directive, you have the ordinary procedure and the fast track. You have guarantees, you have a personal interview, medical examination. This is quite important if you have vulnerabilities. Provision of legal and procedural information free of charge. You will see this with CEF, for example. Free legal assistance and representation of appeal procedures. Provision of free legal assistance and representation, so the people will receive a lawyer. Guarantees for vulnerable persons, like I already mentioned, guarantees for unaccompanied minors, and the right to a judicial review in case of a negative decision. And in the determination criteria, that is the first one, you will find that we have, if you get granted for granting international protection, you only have to prove acts of prosecution in case of refugee or serious harm in the case of subsidiary protection. And then you have the cessation of international protection and the exclusion of international protection. These are cases of people who have committed crimes against humanity or have committed regular serious crimes. So the content of international protection, as you can see, you have the protection for non-refoulement. You have the right of information, like I mentioned. When they arrive, they already get an explanation on how this is going to go. You have the family unity principle. You get a residence permit if that allows you to stay in the territory and actually have the right to access work. Another thing, travel document. If you are a refugee, if you get the refugee status, you will get a refugee passport, this blue nice passport. Or if you have subsidiary protection and you have problems obtaining a national passport from your country, you will get an alien passport. You have access to employment, normally in the same conditions as nationals, with exception to public service, but this is restricted. Normally, access to education, access to procedures for recognition of qualifications. Well, this is theoretically, because sometimes it gets complicated. Access to social security, access to healthcare, access to housing. Well, if you are lucky in Luxembourg, you will have the same problems as any Luxembourgish. It's almost impossible. Freedom of movement within the member state and access to integration facilities. So now, statelessness. Well, I was going to play a video, but I don't know if we have the time, so I will see if this goes.
We are looking at a city like any other. These are the people who live in this city. They live, work, and play freely, thanks to their rights. Everybody, except him. He cannot study because no school accepts him. He cannot get any medical treatment when he needs it. He wants to be productive, but he isn't allowed to work, let alone go elsewhere or travel. There is something that prevents him from even marrying the person he loves. Can you see it too? He is imprisoned by an invisible barrier. His crime? Being stateless. That means he is not a citizen of any state. With citizenship, he could enjoy all the rights most of us take for granted. But for a stateless person, this is impossible. He is a stateless because of discrimination, war, or the dissolution of a state. And in some cases, statelessness is passed on from parents to children. In the world today, there are over 10 million stateless people. Legally, they don't exist. It's time to do something for them. belong.unhcr.org.
I believe this video collects more or less what being stateless is. So let's get some background. Stateless is a legal anomaly which often prevents people from accessing fundamental civil, political, economical, and cultural and social rights. As right now, it's more or less 12 million people around the world, and stateless children is born every 10 minutes. And according to UNHCR, this is discussable. There are 600,000 stateless people in the European Union. And more important is that there is a constant flow of stateless persons in the EU. But what are the main causes of statelessness? State succession. This happened when the Soviet Union fell and also when Yugoslavia fell. So there were people who were not obtaining any documents because they were considered not that they were not part of the nationality of the new state. For example, there were a lot of people who in Yugoslavia who were of other ethnies living in Serbia, and they were considered not Serbians anymore. So when they become Serbia existed, these people become statelessness. Ill-defined or discriminatory national laws. This is typical Libya and Syria, for example, or Iraq. For example, a mother cannot pass the nationality to her kid. So if her husband is dead, she cannot go to the embassy and register a kid because the mother doesn't have any right to transfer the nationality. Arbitrary deprivation of nationality. We already have this case in Luxembourg. Putin in 2000 began taking away the nationality of certain Russian citizens. So you deprive them, and people just doesn't exist anymore. This sounds ridiculous, but this happened also after the Second World War. In Luxembourg, for example, there were 1,600 people who were declared collaborators of the Nazis. So they decided to take away their Luxembourgish nationality. The problem was there were 800 who only were Luxembourgish and have been Luxembourgish for generations. So they reinstated 800 nationalities, but there were 750 that stayed without any registration. The problem was some of these people already have documents, so they're still working. The problem, some of them, was when they wanted to travel abroad, because at the time we didn't have Schengen, we didn't have to move, it was not a problem. So when one of them went to the municipality to try to get a passport, they said, you don't exist. So this is kind of the things that we have committed. Displacement and forced migration, this is what is happening to the Rwanda. Birth of a stateless person, I already gave you examples, and lack of birth registration or inability to satisfy certain requirements for the acquisition of a nationality. What is the state of play in the European Union? We have that not all member states, as you can see, there are 4 member states that have not signed the 1954 Convention, and they have not yet signed it, not ratified. And in the 1961 Convention, that is the protocol to reduce statelessness, you have countries, the best student of the class that are the French on this, because actually the OFRA was born in 1951, the National Office for Refugees and Stateless People. It was born in 1951, even before the convention was adopted. France signed it, but have never ratified it. And you can see that there are 5 member states in addition that have not signed it yet. The recognition procedure is currently a majority of member states, and Norway do not have a specific administrative determination procedure for a stateless person. So this is the problem. The problem is here you have to prove that you don't have nationality. That is very different from what I explained to you with refugees, because refugees only have to prove persecution for refugee status or serious harm for subsidiary protection. The problem here is you have to prove a negative. And if you try to prove a negative, it's kind of different. It's saying, I don't have any nationality. The problem is we have more than 191 countries in the world. So, this have created some problems. Then, for example, you have Austria, Estonia, Lithuania, and the Netherlands do not have any type of determination procedure for stateless persons. The Netherlands is changing this, but for example, this has been because the municipalities have taken the role to deal with this. Bulgaria, France, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Luxembourg, and Spain have a specific administrative or legal determination procedure, but there is no common administrative determination procedure at European level for the determination of statelessness. This means each member state is on its own to do the determinations. The type of procedures that we have identified, you have a specific determination procedures, like I mentioned, so there is a very direct procedure to be done. Then you have Belgium and Italy, who have judicial procedures used by member states for the determination of statelessness. And in Italy, the case is for people who are illegally residing on the territory. And then you have general administrative procedures or inside another administrative procedures. This is the case of the Czech Republic, Finland, Germany, Slovakia, Slovenia, Sweden, and Norway. But this here, what they are trying to do is, if they apply for international protection, then they will determine a substitution procedure for the nationality. And then you have ad hoc administrative procedures. This is the case of Croatia, Ireland, Malta, and Poland. So that means they are confronted and they try to do something that it goes. But as you can see, there is nothing that is accordance different from what I explained with refugees, that you have three major directives that are telling you how to proceed. And here there is another problem. What is the determination of statelessness and the residence permit? Well, many member states, they said, oh, determining that you are stateless, that means I'm recognizing that administratively you don't have a nationality. But this creates a problem because there is no automatic link between the recognition of being statelessness and the right to reside in the country. Different from what I explained on this. So they will not be granted immediately or automatically an authorization of stay or a residence permit in most member states. In Estonia, Ireland, Lithuania, Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Norway, stateless persons are considered as third country nationals. And they have to apply for any residence permit. The problem is if you have never exist legally, how you prove to go and get a job? What experience are you going to do? You want to register in school. What is your level of education? I don't have anything. I don't even have an identity until last week when I was. So then you have Austria, Germany, Finland, Luxembourg, and Sweden that grant a residence permit. Depending on the type of residence permit, the applicant applies for in accordance with the national rules. But the problem is, okay, fine. I want to look for a salary worker residence permit. Yeah, but I have to fulfill all the conditions. I have to prove that I'm qualified to do something, all this kind of stuff. And then it's the same if I want to be a student. I have to prove that I study, but I was never registered in school. Belgium can grant a residence permit using humanitarian regularization procedure. This is wonderful, but you have to go to court to prove that. And obtaining this, you will get it and it will be, but it's a long procedure. Cyprus and the Czech Republic apply procedure for international protection because this will actually grant the person a residence permit directly. And member states would grant a residence permit once the stateless status is granted are Spain, France, Croatia, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, and Slovakia. And like I said, here you have the types of residence permit granted. You have a specific residence permit, general residence permits, like I always said, that are the same conditions, but you have to fulfill the conditions for applying for those. Here you find Portugal and Luxembourg, the same thing. Humanitarian permits, like I said, here you have the Czech Republic that will oblige you to apply for international protection. And humanitarian permits or authorization may raise as part of the return process when the person cannot be removed. These are the cases that you have a person that you are going to expel, but if you're a statelessness, where I am going to send you? Because you don't have a country. So this is becoming a problem. The duration of validity of residence permits granted to stateless persons, it varies from country to country, and you have countries who have a minimum of 2 years and unlimited number of years. Travel documents, the same thing. You have alien passports. Austria, Czech Republic, Finland, Sweden, Slovenia, and Sweden will grant us if you are a third country national who cannot obtain a passport. And then you have the travel document for stateless persons. That is all these countries. This means if you are recognized, you get a travel document, but you don't get a residence permit. And that is very interesting. You get this green passport that only allows you to travel, but will not allow you to reside in the country who issued it. So, like I said, what are the problems? Access to the labor market. It depends on the type of residence permit. In most member states, this access is granted under the same conditions as third country nationals that legally apply for a problem. But I said this is theoretically because you have the problem that you didn't exist before. Access to educational training. Most of the member states grant access under the same conditions as those which apply to third country national legal residing in the member states and or depending on the type of residence permit. If you are a child, you don't have a problem. You can go, you will register in the school. But the problem is most of the schools will require you papers. Last time I have to do this, I was confronted with an Iraqi girl who the embassy, even though they obtained subsidiary protection, there was no way to have a passport for them. So actually, I have to go to the embassy in Iraq. They treat her like if she was a prostitute because she was, her husband left her. So what we have to do is at the end to register the two kids in the school, I actually have to put them in a central park in Luxembourg and call the police. You will say a little bit radical, but what happened? I actually got a report of the police that says there were two little girls playing during school hours. With this, the school actually registered them. Of course, they finally get an alien passport and now they are Luxembourgish citizens. But this, you know, you have to go be inventive to get them to school. Act to health and care. It is granted to by most member states when they are obtaining the status. Before, they will not get it. And access to nationality is simplified in 14 member states. Of course, they have to live for the time and fulfill the rest of the conditions. Support provided for stateless persons in applying for a residence permit. Most member states will respond to you that there is no particular states support or noted that NGOs were actively in this area. Poland reported on their procedure to regularize the status of abandoned minors temporary residence permits. Lithuania noted that the municipality covers certain administrative fees for stateless persons who are long-term residents. Estonia noted that there are preferential criteria for persons of undetermined citizens in obtaining residence permits. Here I have to clarify. This is one thing that UNHCR always is mentioning, the undetermined citizens. This is the Russian minority who lives in Estonia. I always have disagreed with UNHCR in the sense that these people are not statelessness because they have all the benefits without needing to be declared stateless. And Latvia and Hungary describe support embedded in their standard determinations procedure, the situation of stateless minors, stateless children born in the member states. This is good because it applies iuris solis, apply automatically at birth or subject to certain conditions. However, the problem is what happened with the children who are born in exile. The people who, the kids that are born in coming to Europe. Well, birth certificates, this is not an option. Only 2 countries will accept that. The determination procedure, there is no determination procedure. And here the legal representation, at least they are granted legal representation during the determination procedure. Only 1 country doesn't allow it. But the problem is the burden of proof. Here, most member states put the burden of proof of proving that you are statelessness, proving a negative, is on the applicant. Here, there are member states like Germany and the Czech Republic that will actually said, well, we charge the burden of proof. So they can, when it's minors, it's more relaxed, the procedure. Well, what are my conclusions on this? Only 23 member states have ratified the 1954 convention and 20 have ratified the 1961 convention. There is no homogeneity between member states in the determination procedures. We already went through this. And there is no link between the determination of statelessness and the residence permit. As we can see, access to the labor market, education, as well as healthcare and social aid do not depend on the granting of the status, but on the residence permit, if they handle to obtain one, and member states facilitate the access to nationality for stateless children. There is no specific determination procedure for unaccompanied minors, and like I said, in most cases, a guardian is appointed, there is legal aid provided, except in Latvia, and the burden of proof remains with the applicant if it's set. One of the actions proposed will be a harmonization of a stateless determination procedure, increased practical cooperation with other countries about exchange of information and documentation, establish a specific determination procedure for stateless children because this is a vulnerable population, and needs of granting of a specific residence permit for stateless persons when the status is granted by the member states. Harmonize the type of residence permit and the type of travel document granted. So why do we not care for statelessness? Well, you are going to tell me I have explained you a lot. Here, let's go for the nitty-gritty of the issue. First of all, it is not part of the EU acquis, so no member state is obliged to do anything. It is taken as a very complex legal and technical issue. Difficult to prove a negative. Like I said, prove a positive is easy. Prove a negative is almost, you have to prove that you don't have nationality to the state. And you don't have money because you don't have a job. So this becomes a little bit complicated. And this requires a knowledge of international public law and the law of other countries. So this creates another problem. And finally, it is expensive. There is no legal aid in this kind of stuff. And the magnitude of the phenomenon in the EU is relatively low. Possible explanations: fear to become a pull factor. You know that Luxembourg has the biggest navy, commercial navy in Europe. So, during years we were afraid that people will board the ships and women will give stateless women will give birth on our ships. That didn't happen. So don't worry. Lack of sense of persecution of serious harm. You cannot prove anything. The only thing that you don't have is nationality. So lack of coverage by the media. There is no bad scenes in the newspapers. There is no migrants drowning or anything. And ignorance and misconceptions about statelessness amongst the general public. Most people don't know what stateless means. Why should we care? And this is my last section. Problems generated by statelessness. The number of stateless persons continue to grow. And like I said, some countries around the world have stopped registering people. Difficult to return these people to their country of origins. What we do with them? We cannot put indefinite people on detention because we cannot send them anywhere. No member state will take them. And here is the point. These 3 points are what is important for you. There is a social exclusion. These people are non-existent, but if you mind, in this video, you see a guy trying to get married. How you are going to present a guy, a woman or a man to your family? No nationality, no work, no education, no nothing. They are totally socially excluded. And they are victim for human traffickers and criminal organizations. They can be subject to slavery. They don't exist legally. They don't have rights. If you get your kid lost in the middle of Lisbon, you can go to the police and the police will target an Amber Alert, all this stuff. If it's a stateless kid, Nobody cares. Nobody's going to look for it. It doesn't exist. Prostitution. You can get women or men to be exploited either in labor, exploitation of labor conditions. So, and you can put them to prostitute, and you know, they don't have papers. They cannot go anywhere. And then you have organ harvesting. This has been a thing. You can actually use these people if they are stateless, no problem. You can take their organs because, you know, it's not a problem. They don't exist. It will be the same if you have with a pig or anything else. And one that I didn't put, this is the, why should we care? Because these people are totally socially excluded from society. They cannot rent an apartment, they cannot go to school, all this stuff. So that creates a resentment to society. And this becomes the perfect terrorist. It's outside of the scope of any police officers, it's out of context. So this can be used by fundamentalists to other things. So thank you very much. I know it has been a long speech, and I'm ready if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. This was very interesting. I speak for myself. It is, in fact, often that we don't recognize the difference between, we are aware of the idea of refugees, asylum seekers, but often we do not speak or know or learn enough about this stateless person situation. I would ask the audience if they have any questions that they would like to ask. You can ask both in Portuguese or in English. It's fine, we'll manage. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? They're very shy about sex.
Don't worry, you know, I used to be a professor, so you can ask me whatever you want. I always have said that students are the basis of knowledge. Because
we have here on the chat when it's what are the property rights of stateless person or to receive unemployment benefits within the European Union?
there are none. As I said, all depends on the residence permit you get. So, for example, if you have property, how you are going to claim that you have property if you don't even have papers to go to the police? Go to a police station in Portugal. First thing, you want to declare that something got stolen from you. First thing that the police is going to ask you is for your identity card. How a stateless person will do it if it's not recognized. Once it's recognized, he has at least the green passport to go and tell him. But the problem is they don't have actually anything. And it's the same with employment. You need, and this is the problem of not having a direct link between the recognition of the statelessness and obtaining a residence permit. And this creates a huge problem because you can get recognized as a statelessness, but next problem, and I have this case, we had a very interesting case in Luxembourg. This guy who was deprived of nationality by Putin. He came to the Netherlands, asked for asylum. He was rejected. He came to Luxembourg and he asked for being recognized as statelessness. What the Luxembourgish authorities did, they said, no, this is a Dublin case, and they sent it 3 times to the Netherlands, and he came back. This is the perfect case for any lawyer because the guy was a drunk. It was not polite with the staff of the director of immigration. It was the perfect nightmare to deal with. You know, he was sleeping in the streets and all this stuff, but he was getting sick. So at the end, what they decided, he went to court and he won the case because they actually said, no, he's asking for being stateless. So finally, he got his passport. But then, okay, bye-bye, you know, here, but you don't have the right to reside in Luxembourg. You can travel around, but no, I want to live here. So at the end of the day, we went to in a conference I did, we said this, and 3 days later, he got a residence permit based on humanitarian status. But like I said, it's complicated to obtain work for these people because they don't have any history, any legal documentation. So this complicates, and this makes these people more vulnerable than anybody else, because they are discriminated by definition because they don't exist legally.
Thank you very much. Any questions you'd like to ask? There's a question there. Could you? Sure.
Se cidadão for reconhecido por uma nação, por uma pátria, depois ele terá direito de viajar pelos países da União Europeia.
Should I translate that?
Yes,
you
please.
Okay, Mr. Martin is asking if you are recognized, if you are stateless, but you are yet recognized by a member country or a country, and you get a passport, can you travel around the different countries?
You can travel everywhere, not only in the European Union, you can travel around the world.
As long as you get some sort of documentation, correct? And
No, you get a passport, you get a green passport. On the basis of the Convention of 1954, you get a green passport that allows you to travel. The problem is, in the European Union, nobody's going to discuss because it's a document issue by an European country. So it's normally recognized if you have signed the convention, so you can go around and you can even go to another country. The problem is how you get a visa, for example, to go to the United States. You need to prove that you have unemployment, that you have this, that you have that. Because it's the only thing that you are substituting with the determination is that somebody recognized that you don't have a nationality. So you are a third country national without a country. That's more or less, it's an administrative condition that makes the situation complicated. But you can travel. That was actually what the Luxembourg authority said to this guy. Here's the passport. You can go anywhere you want. No, but I want to stay. And it becomes another litigation, but that takes 4 years. And like I said, this is what makes it more complicated, because I have shown you that a refugee can get legal aid for free. Instead, these people have to pay their own lawyers.
Well, thank you very much for your answer, Martin. That's it. Any other questions? We have another question there.
Yes, if we can see an increase of the number of stateless after the Ukraine war, there are no evidence that it is a problem.
Have you heard the question?
Can you repeat it? I understand something about the Ukrainian.
No, if I understood correctly, we have seen an increase in the number of stateless.
There are any evidence that the Ukraine war
has caused. So actually, the question is, have you noticed or have you seen any evidence that the number of stateless persons have increased due to the Ukrainian war?
At the moment, we cannot make a statement. I cannot make a statement because, the problem of right now is that we are just registering. If you see the council decision 2022-382 says any Ukrainian or refugee or a stateless person or anybody else who was residing in Ukraine before the 24th of February will be granted temporary protection. So right now there is a lot of statistics on the numbers of stateless persons. What for me is, what I'm afraid of is that after the war finished, if it ever finished, there will be, in Spanish you said, I don't know, people,
You can say in
When
Spanish.
you settle scores between different parts of the population, because there will be the people who were pro-Russian in Ukraine and the people who were pro-Ukraine. So this always happened in a war. So what I'm afraid is most of these people will be, there were stateless people who run to the European Union, so, but it was not so much. But what I'm scared is if the war finished, there will be a lot of people who will be deprived of Ukrainian nationality. And also Russians that will be declared traitors. If they are not executed, probably they will be deprived. So I'm more worried of what is going to happen afterwards. Or if of Russia, if we follow the story of Putin, that he says that the West wants to dismember the Russia, you know, there will be minorities that will be deprived of nationality, or Russians who will be deprived of nationalities. So I'm more worried about what is after the war that is coming. Probably, yeah, we have some stateless persons. I cannot give you the amounts because, you know, with the Ukrainians, we have this as I always have said, the Ukrainians are royalty. You know, if you tell me a Syrian refugee, if a Syrian refugee just think of going to Damascus or to Aleppo, they will immediately get revoked their status. But with the Ukrainians, they come, they go back, they go visit their family, come back. You know, we don't have a very clear hold on how many people we actually have. For example, if you talk with my colleagues at the BAMF, they will tell you that they have more than 1 million Ukrainians registered. The problem is there are not 1 million Ukrainian registered. Probably there are 20,000 that went to Portugal to have nice weather, or to Spain, because, you know, at the beginning of the war, you know, I worked with a professor of the Boris Grynchenko University, and she was in a refugee structure here in Luxembourg. So she decides to interview her other colleagues, you know, coming, her compatriots, and she described 4 stereotypes of Ukrainians. The ones that are running from the war and looking for protections. The second ones, the ones that decided to do the tour of Europe, because if you remember at the beginning, you know, you can go travel for free all over Europe without any problem. And you have residence reception facilities exclusively for them. So for example, you know, it was different. And then you have the third category, that was the other category was the ones that were benefit shopping. Okay, well, in Belgium, I will get 729 euros. In Luxembourg, I only will get 29. In Portugal, I don't know how much, you know. And the fourth ones, the ones that wanted to leave Ukraine, but they didn't have the means. With this, they just move. So for us, it's very difficult to hold them, because the problem is the international protection is declared by the temporary protection is granted by the European Commission, not by the member states. So we only implement what they tell us to do. So with this, that we don't have any restrictions on changing, it's very difficult to have real numbers of how many stateless persons coming from Ukraine we have, because they are moving.
Thank you very much. Well, we are running a bit out of time, but I would still like to ask you one thing, given that we have a very young audience. Yeah. How do you raise awareness to this problem, and what are the consequences of growing up as a stateless child? Sorry. Do you understand my question? I mean, how do you raise awareness among the young population, among these new, soon enough, they will be taking decisions and they will be very proactive in the life of their own country. How do you raise awareness among them?
This is the difficult part, raising awareness of a problem that is insignificant sometimes. This is more or less the problem with orphan diseases. You know, you just said, well, there are only 100 or 200 in the European Union. Why we care? The problem is the situation becomes, these people are exploited, these people are doing this. And this is my job. My job is trying to explain people in conference like this. And, you know, sometimes I go to schools and I talk to kids, you know, what do you think if you have a colleague that is statelessness? You know, let's put it this way. I give you an example. 3 weeks ago, there was, you know, before you used to have in the north of France, an agreement to do a school trip to the UK, just a school trip of a day. And the agreement between the authorities was you take the boat, you go to the other side, and you don't do it. With Brexit, they require papers, and they figure out there were stateless kids in the class. And 3 kids cannot travel. So like it was all or nobody. These poor kids are discriminated by their colleagues because their colleagues are saying, because of you, I cannot travel. Or because of this. So these people begin to get marginalized. And this is what I try to explain to people. You know, these are human beings. And the most we exclude them, the most we are putting in danger. But it's not only in danger for them, it's in danger for us. Because that's what, like I said, these are the perfect terrorists at the end of the day. Because they have been so discriminated, so excluded, that at the end they resent us. But I can tell you others very dark stories. I have gone with the police to organ harvesting farms. This is something that you would like to see. This is where stateless people taking a kidney, part of their liver, and they then let them die. But who is going to claim anything? Who is going to testify in court? The first thing they said, oh, he doesn't have papers, kick him out. You know, this is the situation, and this is how we raise awareness, explaining to the people that these are human beings.
Thank you very much.
Okay. No.
Sorry, thank you very much. It was very, very interesting presentation. I think we all agree. We have another speaker with us. I will now soon pass the floor to Professor Orlando Gomes. Before I do that, just a quick note about him. He's been our professor of economics at the Lisbon Accounting and Business School for quite a while now. He is a renowned researcher with the Business Research Unit of the Lisbon University Institute, as well as Cefaz. And he has published numerous articles in international scientific journals, books, book chapters, and his research interests range from individual decision-making and behavioral economics to public policy, evaluation, business cycles, international trade, and economic growth. Also, Professor Orlando Gomes has served as the president of the scientific board, and very recently, he was also the president of ISCAL. Today, his talk is going to be about economic inequality. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia. Thank you very much. I don't know where you get all that information. I think that is too much information. Okay. First of all, thank you to all for being present here today. It is a pleasure to be here to talk a little bit about reduced inequalities, this 10th Sustainable Development Goal. I would like to thank, first of all, the presentation of Thomas Ribas, which was, in fact, very interesting. I also acknowledge the presence of Anastasia, which is which I feel always very intimidated to be talking in English near her, not only because grammar, but essentially because her wonderful accent that I can in no way be near that. But most of all, I would like, and before starting talking a little bit about inequalities, essentially to give a special word of thanks to Dr. Filomena Borba, which is our chief librarian here at Cal, and that has made, in fact, a wonderful job in preparing by her own initiative this series of seminars about the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the last one, so this is the 17th seminar. I'm sorry because I was present only in one or two, but it is in fact a very important initiative that we had here in ISCAL along the last 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 years. And congratulations are in fact in order to Filomena for her extraordinary job. So I will talk a little bit about inequalities. I will share here the screen. I also acknowledge the presence here of our audience that is online. We have also many people, many colleagues and students online. So let me see if I can more or less put this in a way that we can all see. I believe so. Okay, so I promise to be brief. I know that we do not have too much time. When Dr. Filomena asked me to talk a little about inequality from an economic perspective, what I thought it would be best is to talk a little bit about how economists look at the issues that are associated with equality and inequality. And so what I have done was essentially to withdraw 8 sentences from 8 papers that are published, 8 scientific papers that are published in this area of knowledge. Essentially to get a sense of what is the main concerns of economists in these areas. So I will be brief in talking a little bit about this. This is just a picture to frame our analysis. So see that in fact there are inequalities in our world, and most of the times they are more or less what we have here. We have in fact a part of the world that is poor, a part of the world that is rich, but we have also, as we all know, strong inequality that lives side to side in our world. And so it is important to talk, and I will talk a little bit about that, the within country inequalities and also the between country inequalities, the inequalities that we have in a more global perspective. But it is also important, and maybe it is the issue that is the greatest worry for economists today, is the inequalities that we see within societies, within people that live side to side. It is precisely that. So the first sentence that I present and that I talk a little bit is more or less a provocation, but we understand that it is important also to put things in the way that this economist, which is a very influential economist that we have today in our world, Gregory Mankiw, who essentially defends the other side, the existence of strong inequalities, and so those that have also high levels of wealth, that have accumulated high levels of wealth due to high incomes that they have as well. And so the title of the article is a little bit provocative. It is the idea of defending the 1%. Here, the main idea is that along the last few decades, and essentially in the second half of the 20th century, inequality was not, in fact, the main concern of economists. Economists, essentially in the Western world, had as main concern growth. If the economy grows, then growth will arrive to everyone, and so everyone will live more or less well. So the idea is that we have a cake, of course, we can slice the cake and give a slice to everyone, but if we do not make the cake grow, this will be almost a useless exercise. And so it is the idea that, in fact, having perfect economic equality is an utopia. It's an utopia because we live, in fact, in a society in which we are all different. It is an heterogeneous society. We are heterogeneous. We do not have the same preferences. We do not have the same expectations. We do not have the same skills. And so we do not have to have all the same things. Some of you will want to accumulate wealth and be very rich 20 years from now. Some will prefer to spend what you earn every day, what economists call the hand-to-mouth behavior, because in fact we do not know if tomorrow we will be still alive, and so some of you will probably not be very interested in accumulating wealth. Others have other preferences, and so maybe we want. So it is impossible, of course, as it is easy to understand, it is impossible to have a perfect equal society. But in fact, this is not the main problem when the United Nations introduced this sustainable development goal. The concern was not surely with trying to generate a society that has a completely equal level of income and wealth among people. Concern is much more what we have seen to be the evolution of inequality along the past decades, and this second sentence describes exactly the reality that we have today and how we have arrived to our days. And the idea is that until the 1920s, and so in the 17th and the 18th and the 19th century, we had in fact a strong income inequality in most of the developed countries. This has changed with the Great Depression in the 1930s, then with the Second World War, and in decades that followed, 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. This was a period in which there was a strong reduction of inequality, and we have created, in fact, much more equal and more equal societies. And this again changed, and changed essentially in the 1980s, 1990s, in a process that continues until the days that we have, until our days. There is, in fact, a strong rise in income inequality within countries, essentially within the developed countries, in the last 2-3 decades, and essentially more acutely in this century. We are already almost with a quarter of century, and in fact, in this quarter of century, there was a very strong increase in inequality, both in terms of income and also the accumulated levels of income, that is wealth. Why this is so? There are many answers, and I will talk briefly about some of them. Here we have some clues. The idea that, but main idea is essentially that with the process of globalization, necessarily we had a concentration of income, and essentially we had the formation of top incomes that we do not had in the past. What we have today is an economy of superstars. It is commonly known and called the economy of superstars. We have an elite that has access to top incomes that are not in any way similar to the incomes that most of us, in fact, have. I'm not talking only about superstars in sports and in music, but I'm talking also about, for instance, the CEOs of large companies, and we know that there are companies in the world that make, in fact, large levels of revenue, and that can, in fact, pay to the CEOs large sums, large amounts of money. Other aspect that we can highlight as well for now, and that is present here, has to do what I was saying before, which is the idea that we have different preferences and different ways to look at our finance, our everyday finance. And the idea is that two people with the same conditions, for instance, in your age, one of you can save, the other one will not save, and the difference of income will be, in fact, very large 20 years from now or 30 years from now, when you will have my age. I will try to be very brief in talking a little bit about the other sentences that I have here. Here, essentially, the idea is that when we look at inequality, we see that there is also, of course, a component of inherited disadvantage. This is also easy to see. And what we see is that we have societies that proclaim, essentially governments say that we have a society with equality of opportunities. There may be policies that, in fact, try to promote this equality of opportunities, but as it is said in the last part of the sentence, this cannot function well in every circumstance. And of course, the starting advantage of those that have already good conditions is always an element that will lead to what is here highlighted in the sentence. The rate of transmission, a high rate of transmission of economic advantage that occurs at the very top, and we know this essentially when we look at the different opportunities in education and access to the various to all that we have possible to access in society. So, not to bother you too much, essentially here what we have is again a series of factors that lead to inequality. Here one aspect in particular, I would just like to mention this because I think that is relevant. Economists generally, as I hope you have studied in your macroeconomics and microeconomics, generally we consider two types of factors of production. We have labor, we have capital. Labor has an interesting feature because if we do not have, fortunately, if we do not have slavery, we own our own labor force. And by owning our labor force, we can extract an income from that labor force. We have a wage that we receive by the utilization of this labor force in production. Capital is not the same type of factor of production. Capital can be highly concentrated in the hands of a few. And the tendency that we have today in our world that is also easy to understand and to perceive is that the process of automation, robotization, the increase in of the efficiency of artificial intelligence, etc., is a process that transfers the creation of wealth from people to machines, that is from labor to capital. And therefore, labor becomes less necessary and capital becomes predominant. And this is also a mechanism through which the income inequality is necessarily increasing in our societies, in societies that we live essentially in the developed world. And so there is a series of factors that are in fact contributing for this inequality to increase. Here, the idea is again more or less the same. It is associated with the idea of innovation. It is highlighted essentially the idea that the wealthiest people that we have today in the world are people that somehow have innovated or manage firms that innovated. And these are essentially, as you all know as well, firms that, as I said earlier, that do not need too much labor, that are essentially intensive in the utilization of capital. If you think of the most rich people in the world today, everyone knows them. They are in fact people that can be framed in what we are saying here when we think about Jeff Bezos, the the other one from the Tesla, the Elon Musk, and et cetera, et cetera. So it is precisely this here. The idea is that we have this process. This process is somehow inevitable, but not necessarily or not completely. The idea here is that, as it is highlighted, that institutions and policies matter. For instance, we know that in the United States, the increase in income inequality was much faster than in the countries from Western Europe. And this has a reason. The reason is associated with the role of the state, of the government, and the institutions that somehow may promote more or less this equilibrium that is necessary between the incentives that people need to create wealth and also the necessity to have everyone integrated in society. And this leads us to the last highlighted term that is here in this sentence, which is the idea that without acceptable levels of equality, we will have a problem of the social sustainability of globalization. So to end this series of ideas, now shifting a little bit, going a little bit to the issue of the between country inequalities. It is important to remark that we have witnessed along the last 3-4 decades to fast convergence between income levels in our world. Our world is less uneven today than it was 50 years ago. Why this is so? Essentially because there is a series of countries that have grown significantly and that have given good conditions for their people, and essentially have withdrawn from poverty a large percentage of their population. Essentially, we are talking about China and India. China and India together represent, as you know, almost 40% of the world population. If we take also the other countries in the same region that have grown as well, and that are also very populous in that area, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Iran, and others, we see that there is, in fact, many people living poverty, and so not all is bad. In fact, in the way that the economy has been working along this last half century, if you wish. So the last sentence is essentially to underline once again that growth is good for the poor, that growth and the reduction of inequality may go hand in hand, but we should be careful because, in fact, if we let levels of inequality to be very high, then this can be, in fact, be destructive to growth for reasons that we all understand, from political instability to the instability of the financial system, etc. So to finish, I promise to be brief. I just need 1 or 2 more minutes just to talk a little bit also about my own research. Sofia talked a little bit about what I was been doing. So let me just say that I essentially study economic growth from a theoretical perspective. This necessarily is associated with the themes of inequality, of course, for all that I have said. These aspects are linked, and also with another point that is important, which is the threats that our world face today that it didn't face so acutely several years or several decades ago. There is an important fact that I have drawn from the United States page on the Sustainable Development Goals, and the fact is this one that contradicts what I was saying before, which is the idea that for the first time in a generation, in the 50 years that I have mentioned, for the first time in a relatively small period of time, the between country inequality in fact rose, and this coincides with the period of the pandemic that in fact led again to a rise in in extreme, very high levels of income concentrated in a few people, or in a few people, yes. And this led again to a fall in the process of convergence that we were witnessing. So this is the last slide. When I said that I am studying these issues, essentially when I talk about global risks, I take into consideration a very well written and an influential report that is published every year by an international organization, which is the World Economic Forum. These reports, you find them without difficulty in the net. They are the global risks annual reports, and these reports make an assessment of the risks that the global economy face. And the report considers 5 categories of risks, which are the ones that are considered here. Of course, they are intertwined, they are linked with one another. Essentially, and I would like to highlight that the societal risks, for instance, we can include here the risks of infectious diseases, something that was predominant not too far in time, but now we have a predominance of geopolitical risks. Technological risks are also very relevant when we think about cybercrime and cybersecurity, and so we have the lesson here is that we have in fact much to worry about. So you leave here a little bit more depressed than you entered with my intervention. So I am studying these issues. As I have just here a note. If you know someone that is a researcher in this area, I have now open a call for papers to receive papers for a special issue in an international journal about these topics. The journal is called Macroeconomica. And so this was precisely the last note. And so I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Gomes. Again, I would like to ask you if you have any questions you'd like to ask. This is a very different presentation, different perspective on the idea of inequality, not less important than the previous one, surely, one that affects us directly as well. Filomena has got the question. Go ahead, Filomena.
Yes, I'm not, I don't have the British accent, I'm sorry. So, and one of the quotes, it's education can change. This is, that one is very important for me. We can change the world by education. That's why it's important to reduce the inequalities through education. And what I want to say to all of you, we have a lot of books about this issue in our library in English. The first one, for example, Mankin, we have, and we have also others. You can study, you can go further in your works, your papers to the last, say the classes, for the subject you have, you can go further because we have a lot of books related to these issues. And also we have databases. We are in the library. The library is the most inclusive and equal place in the world. So go there and take profit all of everything we have. And thank you so much to have here, for being here and listen. And if you have any questions at home or online, you can also do. And also I want to thank you to Sra. Maria Annalise and Sra. Maria do Rosário to bring these young people. They behave very well, and I hope they can ask questions to our speaker. And
so the question here will be education masters, in fact.
Education must make the change.
Anything?
Education makes the change. Education matters. We need public policies that go in that direction, that do not constitute, in fact, the main problem is the absence of policies, because if we do not have policies oriented to solve the problem, what we will have is the market working. The market is obviously very good and very efficient in promoting the creation of wealth. But I go to the first slide. We need in fact a balance. We have the growth. We need the growth, but we also need the policies to integrate everyone and to everyone to have the opportunities to benefit from that growth.
Martin has got a question.
I would like to ask you if you agree with that outlook that says that the 1% needs to exist, and in certain way inequalities are important for our society.
As everything in life, we need a balance. As I agree in the sense that we do not have to be all equal, because we do not all want the same things. We do not have the same skills, and we do not apply the same effort to do things. If I believed in perfect equality, when I give my grades to the students, I would give the same grade to all the students. I do not do that, because there is in fact different efforts, different skills, different abilities, different capacities. And it is important for a healthy society to work to promote merit, to promote, to have incentives for people to do things. But there is the need for a balance. What we have arrived in the last 2 decades and today is to a world that is in fact extremely unequal, and essentially the wealth that we see in those that have the highest levels of wealth is absurd. When we look at the fortune of Bezos, of Musk, and the other half a dozen of them, this is not how the economy should work. Those people would need many lifetimes to spend all the money that they have, and so public policies are necessary, in fact, to make the balance more even and to give to everyone the minimum for their existence and to have meaningful lives.
Just a little remark. In this unbalanced world, and of course, probably none of us will get the same wealth of Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, not even if we won the race. But for most of us, the only change that we can get is if it's like Tonana said, through education. Try the most to get the knowledge, to get skills. Because for most of us, it's the only change we can get in life and get some wealth or a little more wealth is through education.
Just before we go, I do have also quick questions. Very, very quick questions, I promise. The thing is, how do you balance the concerns we have with reducing economic inequality if you are now going through this soaring inflation, the increase of interest rates? How do you balance this? How do you reduce inequality? You don't. I mean, I understand you need different people, different economy, so to speak, but how do you address that? Because you mentioned very interestingly that absolute poverty has fallen sharply, but poverty seems to be on the rise given this circumstance. And my second question was, if we are aware that country and institutions matter, the policies that they apply matter, why is it that we see the US with such a big difference and the Western countries not so much so? And why and I apologize for why do the US not learn from this good example? Do they want to? Perhaps they don't want to, actually.
Okay. Okay. Interesting questions. We could be here all day. Regarding inflation, I know that most of you are. I don't know what courses are you? Accounting
and management, right?
Accounting management. So you have macroeconomics and microeconomics, and essentially in macroeconomics, we do not talk much about inflation, but when we study economics, and the first time that the teacher tells us something about inflation, the first thing that is said is that inflation is bad because it provokes a redistribution of income that is unfair, that is unfair. And so this is what we have today. If you have noticed the news the last few days, you have seen that in case Portugal, in the last year, 2022, was the year that we have grown, we have the highest growth in 35 years, I believe. And so the economy has grown. So we are, in fact, much better than we were in the last year. But this is also because we were recovering from the pandemic. So in global, in Portugal, there was not, in fact, a decrease in income in the last year. By the contrary, there was an increase in income for the country considered as a whole. But inflation has led, in fact, to a redistribution, an unfair distribution of this income and wealth, because most of the people have lost their purchasing power, has lost the ability to buy as many goods and services as before, while there was, in fact, some, this is the natural consequence, a concentration of wealth. So what we had in the last year was, in fact, an unfair distribution of income, with some people benefiting much and many people losing something. This is a problem. How do we solve this problem? With correct policies, and this is, in fact, the role of the government. We need policies that are able to somehow even this process. This is not easy, because if it were easy, economists were not needed. We have many economists studying these issues, because there are no absolute answers. But in fact, there are redistributive policies that can be applied and implemented in moments like this to make it less unfair, the problem of inflation that we are facing. Regarding the United States and Europe, it is again an issue of balance, and what balance do we want? Because having policies that somehow may even the balance is good, but we should look as well to the other side, and the other side is that a society with too much redistribution kills the incentives, and if people do not have the incentives, there is no creation of wealth. The United States was always a much open society at this level, with the minimal intervention of the government, and everyone makes his own life without too much intervention. This is good, but this is bad as well. When we look at the American society, we know the American dream. It is good to live the American dream, but the American dream leaves behind many people, as we have also conscience of that.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that's it now. We don't have time for any more questions. I would like to thank Martin for his 2 questions, everyone in the audience, and propose a round of applause to our 2 speakers. Thank you very much, everyone. I think this was a successful end to this initiative of Sustainable Development Goal, 1 a month.
Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned, because we have more activities about the SDGs. Okay.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.